Man, this Blaze Funko Pop is pretty dang sweet, but I have this nagging feeling this is part of a bigger problem for the character. A character who's tied with Shadow as my favorite in the entire series, that also debuted 21 years ago in the Nintendo DS exclusive Sonic Rush. While most people remember her from Sonic 06, at least I do, cause that was my first exposure to Blaze, and I really liked her character ever since. Though it doesn't change the fact that this game tarnished Sonic's history for the longest time, and only recently started breaking free of that reputation in the past 5 to 6 years. But Sonic Rush, as well as its sequel, Sonic Rush Adventure, are where Blaze really shined, and sadly never got the chance to again, becoming one of the most underused characters in the franchise. I know, we're still technically in the milestone anniversary year, and I'd rather be talking about something more positive to celebrate, though there is some silver lining to this discussion. But it'll never fail to baffle me how Sonic Team created this character and included her in the game stories for the first 3 years of her existence, gave her a backstory about her viewing her ability to control fire as a curse, causing her to be picked on by other children when she was younger, resulting in her wearing a cape to conceal those powers, ultimately not making any friends and becoming withdrawn until meeting Sonic and his friends, resulting in the Soul Emeralds, her dimension's version of the Chaos Emeralds that she's the guardian of, being restored, take down both Eggmen with an SA2 style team-up, and restoring their dimensions back to their natural states. Followed up by Sonic 06, which continues to confuse the heck out of Sonic Rush fans as to when it even takes place. The official Sonic timeline says Rush happens first, though I think most people settled on Sonic 06 taking place before Rush, since Blaze doesn't even know who Sonic is in either game. Yet, she remembers Crisis City and Generations even in the remaster, where Mephiles has been all this time in Shadow's campaign. Yet Shadow didn't recognize him or the Scepter of Darkness, so that throws my own theory of memories going to white space out the window, but they had amnesia, yeah right. Also, why'd her and Silver have to go back to the future, reference not intended, to stop the threat there? Wouldn't Sonic succeeding in stopping Elise's death be enough to make that ruined future no longer ruined? Meaning it would have been fixed before they even arrived? Oh, that's right, Elise can't live forever, so it was gonna happen eventually. Never mind. With the timeline reset sending her back to her own dimension, where she never had to go to Crisis City in the first place, somehow remember it, but not Sonic. I don't know, trying to make sense of 06's story is like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube. This is why we need more Blaze material in the games, which we did get in Sonic Rush Adventure, and finally got to see Blaze's dimension. She still remembers Sonic, with the timeline placing it after 06. She got her own version of Tails with Marine, who she's not exactly nice towards at first, but results in even more character growth by the end, at the expense of losing Marine.
I just want Marine the Raccoon to call home and let us know that she's safe.
Not to worry, Ant, she did. 15 years later in the IDW comics. For one issue, and a flashback in another issue. So after Rush Adventure, Blaze basically disappeared from having any major roles in mainline stories altogether. Black Knight doesn't count, that's a completely different character, shut up. Blaze, alongside Silver, never appeared in any of the animated shorts or TV shows after their debuts. Those being Sonic X, Boom, and Prime. Sonic X was already ending, so that was out of the question. Boom I can understand because of the hassle of actually getting game characters into the show because of guidelines. I mean, we were fortunate to even get Vector in here. And Sonic Prime was all about dimensions, so Blaze would have been a perfect choice for it, I'm just saying. Although, Silver did finally get his animation debut in the Crossworlds animation last year. Took you long enough. So instead, Blaze mainly appeared as a playable character in spin-offs like Sonic Riders and the Mario and Sonic Olympic series, minigame modes in Secret Rings and Black Knight, or mobile games like Dash and Jump. And it's still happening with stuff like Rumble, Speed Simulator, and Speed Battle. But it's not like she hasn't had any story involvement since 2007 though, as she's had a small role in Colors DS, which takes place concurrently to the console game, something I learned pretty recently. a slightly bigger presence in Team Sonic Racing's story, and of course the IDW comics. This is the big one, because these are canon to the game timeline, taking place right after the events of Forces and filling in gaps in the story, with issue 84 onward taking place after Sonic Frontiers and introducing Sage to the comics. Well, the writers had to explain Frontiers actually happened around issue 68 to avoid story conflicts, so we've been in post-Frontier stories for a while now, Dream Team included. Anyway, I got into these comics pretty late into the game, practically right before Sonic Movie 1 premiered, roughly 6 years ago. And with as much missed potential Forces had, and how we almost got the ugly Sonic movie, I was so glad we got these. We were getting fun scenarios, more continuity than the games provided at the time, multiple darker storylines and arcs throughout the comic's run. I was in tears reading Metal Virus, by the way. Stuff that probably wouldn't even fly in the games. And it was great re-experiencing these through Sam Procrastinates' streams of the Adrenaline dubs this year, officially getting him into the comics, finally.
You guys were right, I've been missing out on Peak.
They're that good. And go give both Sam and Adrenaline dubs a sub, they deserve it. I also wouldn't mind one as well, just saying. But most of all, the IDW comics had character interactions that wouldn't have happened in the games, and actually giving them story involvement. Some of which not having any since Generations, which was almost non-existent, so you might as well not even count it. These comics actually restored my confidence in the Sonic series, cause they still have what works, just not being used in the games of the time, which there wasn't any new mainline titles until Frontiers, so I'm still keeping up and reading them to this day cause of how much of an impact they had on me. Which the Adrenaline dubs elevated to a whole new level, my gosh. With the characters feeling like the ones I grew up with, barring Shadow during Metal Virus, though he has definitely improved a lot since then. Amy went through a bit of development in these by having her lead the Resistance turned Restoration after Knuckles left. She eventually hands the role over to Jewel after the Metal Virus saga ended, and I honestly can't blame her. She's seen things, might have turned to a Zombot after Eggman's cheap move. So yeah, alongside Jewel, we have several new characters, with Surge and Whisper becoming some of my favorite additions to the main cast, simply cause of their backstories alone. Which we have Ian Flynn to thank for these characters simply existing, the same for Tangle. And I can see why so many people wanted him to write for the games back then, only to immediately want him off the games at the launch of Frontiers cause of the editing of cutscenes that he had no control over, and now that's just an endless meme. That's not how this works, the writers don't edit the cutscenes, dang it! Anyway, bringing it back to the topic, there's loads of good Blaze content in here, with interactions that, again, otherwise would not have happened in the games. Her most recent appearance actually brought tears to my eyes, just on the account of them referencing the cloak from her backstory, showing how far she's come since Rush. They even touch upon the amnesia thing when Sonic winds up in Blaze's dimension right after using Supersonic to rid the world of a metal virus, resulting in him having amnesia when entering the dimension. It's a subtle detail that I didn't really connect the dots on until somebody told me, but regardless of the order we think 06 and Rush takes place in, this theory kinda falls flat cause she remembers Sonic and Tails in Rush Adventure, and Amy and Cream in later games like Crossworlds, which references Sonic Rush, so unless it's temporary amnesia, like I said, it's the 06 Rubik's Cube all over again. And there's an official explanation for all of this, according to Ian Flynn, but Sonic Team just does not want to share it right now. What are they waiting for? Sonic Rush free? A year of Blaze? Come on guys, it's the 20th anniversary for the character, do something! And finally, the 2022 annual, with her seeking advice from Knuckles, one guardian to another. Dang it, this is one of my favorite interactions in all of IDW. So we have Knuckles to thank for Blaze taking a vacation in Sonic's world and leaving Marine in charge while she's gone, who actually wasn't allowed to appear until this issue, and hasn't appeared again, outside of a flashback and a playable appearance in Speed Battle. Naturally, this makes Blaze a lot more accessible for future stories, instead of pulling her out of her own dimension every time we turn around like in TSR. The same goes for Silver and his future. There's certainly debates surrounding those choices, and I can't say I fully agree with the decision. Yes, we get more Blaze, but I really want to see more of Blaze's world, specifically in a 3D setting. There's untapped potential and a lore waiting to be told there. But I'm sure the aforementioned Sega and Sonic Team guidelines make things an absolute nightmare if anyone actually wants to do something with it in Silver's future that's not in a game. Hence why we don't see him at all. We were fortunate just to see the Soul Dimension 3 times across the entire comic run. Meanwhile, Silver's future only just got a couple of panels, and that was it. What are we doing? That said, how on earth do we go from a strong introduction of a fire princess from another dimension, one of the only non-hedgehogs to have a super form with Burning Blaze, combining Sonic's speed, a similar backstory to Tails, and Knuckles' guardian role into one, to making so much smaller, non-important appearances in anything outside the comics? I think, until recently, it's because Sonic Team have been in overprotective mode on the use of Blaze since 06. It's why every time she gets recasted, she winds up being the most consistent character voice-wise in the entire series, and appearances outside IDW have been very minimal. Part of it is obviously the timeline confusion 06 caused, not to mention hurting the reputation of the franchise and amplifying the criticism of Sonic has too many friends, causing Sonic Team to not focus on him very much on a gameplay front, and even less on the story front. Usually just opting to make Sonic the only playable character, and just focusing on the main core cast, with anybody else just kinda being there. Colors DS and Generations were the big examples of this. Meanwhile, Forces did at least try to make them have bigger roles again, on top of attempting to bring back the darker stories. Shadow was even in character for the only time in the 2010s. I just wish they had more time to flesh out the story and the gameplay, cause there was so much missed potential there. Oh, it's irritating. And momentarily bring her out of the box for stuff like Generations, like, hey, you remember this character? Then puts her back in the box, rinse and repeat. Arguably, that can be said about the merch itself. I bought this Funko to show Sega that this character needs more love, and that very well could be happening in real time. Because, starting with Forces, they've been trying to establish a consistent universe. It's why IDW springboards off Forces, references it, fills in gaps in the plot, and builds upon its loads of missed potential, with the new character Mimic doing things I wished Infinite did. Then, starting in Frontiers, they've been hyper-focused on reintroducing these characters and elements, both the stuff people loved, and things that weren't as much. Not just for the longtime fans by reintroducing a sense of continuity on the game side of things, but for newcomers to join in as well. Frontiers added more backstory to Chaos, the Chows, and even the Chaos Emeralds. The cutscenes took their time and felt natural, plus everyone, barring Sonic, received the most character development they've had in ages. Eggman's being the most surprising. Sonic even mentions Blaze, but I have no idea if this line actually appears in the game, or if it was cut. Frontiers directly addresses the mishandling of Tails' character over the years. Yes, that scene in Forces does come to mind, but it's honestly one of my favorite scenes in Frontiers. Knuckles started being the Master Emerald Guardian again, and starting with Movie 2, stopped being the joke character he was for almost the entirety of the 2010s. Even going so far as having the final cutscene of a remastered Generations adjusted to reflect that, at the expense of making Amy not being as comedically strong. Listen, I know there's been some strong opinions about Amy ever since Frontiers, so I'm absolutely risking walking on eggshells to avoid being called things that aren't even accurate just for talking about this. So I will make this as crystal clear as I can. I'm not mad at Amy's personality in Frontiers. Somebody's probably wanting to kill me for saying that. But please put down the pitchforks, the torches, and the pico hammers, okay? What it comes down to is the circumstances and the tone that kinda warrant her outlook in the game. I mean, she's literally out of touch with reality to the point of flowers right in front of her, but she cannot touch or grab it. Yeah, I would be the saddest person in the world if I couldn't even do that. I'm just saying. And I even think back to this line from a Ratchet and Clank Intimate Nexus multiple times throughout Frontier's story.
Can you imagine seeing your kind right there? Close enough to touch, but impossible to reach.
Yes. Yes, I can.
Now, for the Amy fans who still haven't put down the pitchforks, torches, or hammers yet, I promise you're gonna like this next part. The Crossworld's arrival dialogue, I understand, is problematic. I don't personally take as much issue with them as others do, as I think there's still a few good lines in here.
Reel in that tongue, you creep, and stick to your lane. Otherwise, you'll see how wild I can be.
But the rest of her non-arrival voice lines in Crossworlds are perfectly fine and exactly what people want from the character.
Got your attention, Sonic?
You've got my attention now, Amy.
Surprise, Vector!
Give me a break, Amy.
I tagged Espio!
Delivered with care, Amy. Undisciplined, Amy.
Back off, Espio! Surprise, Amy! Charmy, quit it!
However, nobody bothers talking about these, and I think more people should take note of these in the discussion, instead of always complaining about the rival dialogue. Because if you don't point out the good in something and always the bad, that right there does not provide a good metric for the developers to balance things out. So we get nowhere. And yes, I do find it pretty odd that they changed this part of the generation's intro cutscene, but they left this part right beforehand intact, resulting in the change making even less sense. But it's not Ian's fault, guys. He created a large chunk of the groundwork for IDW, doing the first 30 issues and all the side series barring Scrapnik Island, so he wrote plenty of Amy in that time, pretty well in my opinion, all before Evan took over as the lead writer for IDW. Of course, there's also the Archie comics and the 2 episodes of Sonic Boom he wrote, so yeah. Okay, with the Amy situation out of the way, let's get back to the topic. Shadow Gens continues Shadow's story from Shadow 05, reintroduces people to the character, his backstory, Black Doom, the Black Arms, the gun, and its commander, aspects that made the game feel overly dark and sometimes comedically edgy, just to appeal to an older demographic that would have gotten a higher age rating if things weren't cut. It also re-established a Team Dark in the game, so don't start on Rouge. Gerald, Maria, and even Mephiles got reintroductions, cause why not? Newcomers were probably just as confused as Shadow when Mephiles showed back up. And with the help of Movie Free, Shadow's 2000s identity that was lost in the 2010s, aside from Forces, the only game where he felt intact, was also re-established. Crossworlds leaned heavily into the Sonic Riders content, just not in the costume department, so that was a letdown. I did a whole retrospective on Sonic Riders 1 last year, if you want to go check that out in the top right corner. These games were highly criticized back in the day for Jet's voice, the air system in the first game, and rightfully the Kinect and Free Riders for obvious reasons. Zero Gravity, I legit don't know what complaints that one had, but I overall enjoyed it as much as the first game. Crossworlds also brought back stuff from Secret Rings, Forces, and Unleashed, not just the daytime stages, but the night stages with a playable werehog to boot. I'm just gonna say it, the werehog wasn't as bad as everyone made him out to be. To be fair, I also didn't like the werehog gameplay at first, but over time, I've grown to really appreciate it a lot more. And while I'm at it, I'm just gonna throw this out there, but if Tangle ever becomes playable in a mainline game, I could easily see her moveset just being a massively upgraded werehog, which would be the coolest combo ever, it just makes too much sense. Zavik and the Deadly Six even got redemption, though it mostly happened in the comics roughly 7 years ago, but it's nice to see everyone who didn't read them, or just didn't like Lost World, react so positively towards how Zavik was written in Crossworlds, which is when I found out people actually liked Zavok's characterization in the comics. And also, Crossworlds even implies Silver has problems with Azzetti in his future. And I might as well throw this out there as well, since I learned it while making this video. I learned that each of Azzetti, the Deadly Six, are over 100 years old each. Let that sink in for all you Xena fans. Who also happens to be the best of the Deadly Six, I'm just saying. We now have the Chaotix Case Files, a mystery podcast featuring our favorite group of detectives. I love these guys, ever since they showed up in Sonic X, great comedy characters. But this series, and the IDW comics, really made me appreciate this group outside of a comedy with their dynamics. Really glad these guys are getting re-established and introduced to a new generation of fans. Especially since the last time they were all in a game together before Crossworlds was Forces. Now to my knowledge, everyone likes the Chaotix, so why am I including them in this section? Because this released at a point in the 35th anniversary celebrations that the series was celebrating its 2010s era. An era people actually despise outside Colors, Generations, Racing Transformed, Mania, and the Boom TV show. Oh, I hope this means Styx is coming back. It's been years since that name drop in Frontiers, and I hope that payoff is coming soon. This era naturally includes Forces, and the Case Files gave characters like Tangle and Whisper, who I keep forgetting actually debuted in the 2010s, their first ever voices. Which is pretty surreal, because I've been with the comics for 6 years at this point, so I've had my own idea of what they would sound like, and they did not disappoint on the castings.
I'm Whisper, the wolf. I'm a sniper.
No. You gotta give the people more than that.
Even Gemerald joined the first ever voice club in this series since his Sonic Advance Free debut, alongside how we actually pronounce his name for once.
Gemerald, I've gotta say, buddy, you are a sight for sore, bruised, banged-up eyes tonight.
Analysis. Multiple contusions detected. Interrogative. Why did you crash your helicopter into the ground?
And Vanilla got her second VA since Sonic X, which is already a massive improvement.
And please check on Cream. I've been worried about her.
Gemerald, could you perhaps analyze it, please?
Anyway, like the rest of the IDW comics, Tangle and Whisper were spawned as part of the Force's springboard I mentioned earlier, with Whisper being inspired by this very specific custom character you can make in the game. And she has her own variable Wispin, the weapons from the same game that utilize the Wisp's hyper-go-on power from Colors that people often complained they showed up where they shouldn't be, like Lost World. Though Forces does have an explanation, it just wasn't until IDW gave us that explanation a year later. But unlike other Wispins that can only use a single Wisp power at a time, Whispers can use any kind of Wisp. And by any, I mean the 5 that are always with her, and I don't know if she can use any others, so... Regardless, it's awesome, and I have a video planned for how she could play in a mainline game, so... we'll see if I get around to making that one. Anyway, the Case Files also brought back Gun, who already returned in Shadow Gens and Movie 2 after disappearing off the face of the planet after 06, explaining their absence during the Eggman War and Forces. Spoilers, they lost and they're still sore about it. The Gun Commander attached to all the latest appearances, originating from Shadow 05, who we now know as Abraham Towers, a name from the Archie comics on the mainline side. The implementation of the name was essentially after Movie 2 made up a name for that version of the character. And now, the main reason I brought up the Case Files in the first place is because they brought Infinite back from the grave. Well, he actually never died, so...
I am not weak!
Yeah, that ain't the punching bag anymore. Infinite's a pretty cool villain overall. Definitely one of my favorites from design, powers, and even voice perspectives, as indicated by my Twitter feed in the weeks after. I just think he was the source of so much of the untapped potential in Forces, like the idea of creating illusion copies of ally characters in episode Shadow that was never expanded upon outside of that DLC. Well, maybe if we put aside the Shadow copies. Now Mimic took on the idea in IDW, but he could not copy abilities. Meanwhile, Infinite's latest story appearance could. Finally! I'm glad he's back, and I got a dedicated video talking all about his return if you want to go check that out when it eventually gets finished. It's probably going to be out closer to Force's anniversary or something. Oh, and by the way, the community came together to unlock Infinite for free in Sonic Rumble. Always bet on Infinite. It's his year, so get on the Infinite train. But yeah, all of this shows they're willing to embrace the games or aspects of a series many would consider low points and not be ashamed of them. which would naturally relate to Sonic 06. The ultimate blemish on the series that's still one of my favorites in the series, elevated by Project 06, as it's been getting referenced more and more lately. Going so far as redesigning Elise in the new human art style, mentions of Soliana and IDW, and since Silver, Blaze, and 06 are so closely tied to each other, it makes sense to start expanding on any and all association with it, as the next step next to Unleashed and Forces, though probably not on a story front since it kinda erased itself from the timeline, but you know, semantics. Although, it was recently revealed that Silver and Blaze will be getting a free issue solo adventure in the IDW comics for issues 89 to 91, as part of the Road to 100 story arc. According to my estimates, and if there's no further delays, those will release in August through October, the tail end of Sonic Rush's anniversary year, and leading into the start of Sonic 06's 20th anniversary timeframe. This makes me so dang happy, because it's been a while since these two have been in a comic story. Even longer since either of them got a dedicated story with most of the focus, either separate or together. And presently, one of the stages they brought back for Crossworlds as a brand new track, and I'm so dang happy it's here, especially in time, at the time of release, for Sonic Rush's 20th anniversary, and that's a Water Palace in 3D for the first time. When I first played this back in the closed beta, I was blown away by how this place looks in 3D. As it doesn't look like Windmill Isle or Blue Coast anymore, it has its own identity. Now, it could also not be the same place from Rush, but I like to believe it is. Not to mention, Blaze has proper interactions with the rest of the cast in game form now, thanks to the game's arrival system, making up for the fact there's no dedicated story mode. There's some wholesome exchanges with her first friend Cream, her and Shadow having respect for each other, making this their first ever dialogue exchange in a game, though she has seen his power before in IDW, as well as marking Blaze's first time interacting with several characters like Jet, Zaz, Sage, and even the other Chaotix members outside of Vector. But perhaps the best one is this one against Zavok.
Let us see whose flames burn more fiercely.
Mine are a costly burden, while yours are merely guttural expulsions. We are not remotely the same.
Oh, this is the voice range we never heard from Blaze in the games until now because of her lack of involvement in the game stories, and we need to fix that ASAP! This is what I hope the future mainline story games take advantage of, and hopefully the next open zone game can deliver on that. At the same time, incorporating a sense of community with the locations from the IDW comics with the use of side quests, something these open zone games have been severely lacking, for smaller side adventures like the comics have, which the comics are constantly referenced in Crossworlds. From Silver and SBO facing off with the Deadly Six during the Metal Virus, to Blaze referencing Battle for Angel Island and how she entrusted the Soul Emeralds to her royal guard while she's on vacation, hence why she's able to be in more stories now. Tangle and Whisper made their way into Rumble, became fully voiced in the Chaotix case files, now we just need their voices added into Crossworlds, not by mods. Crossworlds, of course, being developed by Sonic Team. It's been 2 years since they were casted, come on. Not to mention Surge and Lanolin got added into Rumble as well, with Surge also getting added into Speed Simulator quite recently. This tells me we're presently in the unification phase between the IDW comics and the mainline games, with Sage having just appeared in the Chaotix case files and made her IDW debut this year. A moment I've been waiting for since Frontiers. And now, IDW characters in the mainline games? I don't think we're ready for Surge in a mainline story, if I'm being perfectly honest. Those fights are about to go crazy. But hopefully with it brings more focus on Blaze, as well as characters that have gotten significantly less attention than Blaze. I'm not gonna pretend she's gotten the least. Just look at how Gemeral's been treated since his debut. He came back in the IDW comics during the Metal Virus, and he just now got a voice. Despite the next Sonic game possibly not releasing during Blaze's 20th anniversary timeframe, and Rush not receiving a 20th anniversary event in Rumble, yet Shadow 05 did because it also turned 20 in 2025, Everyone deserves a chance, even if they're NPCs that populate the world to give it more life or just becoming outright playable. But considering the 2020 era games and projects already reintroducing many aspects and characters from the 2000s, the natural next step would be to reintroduce Silver and Blaze. I say Silver cause the two have been closely tied together since '06, so you can't really do one without the other at this point, even though it has been done. Don't go acting like the two are always occupying the same stories, cause that is not true. Not to mention, this year marks 20 years since Silver's debut, but with the reputation of '06 attached to that, we'll have to see how they go about celebrating. We did already get the aforementioned redesigned Elise, just not in game form yet, so there's that. And also, the producer at Sega, Shun Nakamura-san, mentioned Mephiles alongside Infinite and Silver in regards to supporting the Sonic brand. Out of all the characters to choose from, those were some pretty interesting choices. And I clocked it as a tease towards Infinite's return from minute one. Infinite fans truly won this year, by the way, and I cannot wait to see what else they do with him. Now, if Silver and Blaze were to ever get into the movie universe, though with the next film being focused on Amy and Metal, I could maybe see Blaze having somewhat of a role on the game side of things, considering Amy played a decently sized role in Blaze's story and becoming one of her first friends. They would need this kind of major reintroduction to the characters like Shadow got, so people can actually have a reason to care about these characters for when they do eventually appear in these movies, which is kinda hard to do if Blaze's origin story is stuck on the DS and not playable on modern hardware, which thankfully the fan remake, Sonic Rush Rerun, is gonna be correcting. The whole game playable on a single screen with fully voiced and completely animated cutscenes. Goodbye, text box story. But that's still a ways off from being finished, and I'm very much looking forward to it nonetheless. Until then though, we have the IDW comics that are talked about in the community, but I guarantee not a lot of people who aren't already established Sonic fans are bothering to read them. Like I said, Sam just now got into them because of Crossworld's adding Tangle and Whisper, which was perfect timing because of their Case Files debut shortly beforehand. That audience is a whole lot smaller than if people seen these characters in a game, movie, or an animated series, which we all know a new show is coming, a rumor or not, it's gonna happen. It's been 2 years since Prime ended. Just don't do Sonic Prime again, where the whole show is centered around a single adventure. Revisit the structure of Sonic X with mini arcs spread out with room for single episode adventures. Basically IDW, but with the animation of Shadow Dark Beginnings and the Crossworlds animation. That is my dream Sonic show. And since rumors are saying it'll be 2D animated, which would be a first since Sonic X, Sega, please let Studio GigX work on this show, I beg of you! But with all that said, the future looks brighter for Blaze than it ever has. Both her and Rush are getting even more acknowledgement through the official Sonic socials this year, and I couldn't be happier. But that's enough from me, I want to hear what you guys have to say. Do you think Blaze will have more focus in the next game, sometime after? How would you see her being introduced in the films? What's been your favorite Blaze moment? Where's Blaze on your top favorite Sonic characters list? Am I going to shut up with the Blaze questions and finish the video? And are you excited for the upcoming Blaze and Silver story arc in IDW? Anything and everything, be sure to leave it all down in the comments section below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell for more Sonic content. And once again, I've been Blue Knight. Thanks so much for watching and for the constant support, I really appreciate it. And until next time, keep on running.